My name is Elsa Rubin. I'm the acting chair tonight because unfortunately our chair, Jen Morgenstern, is very ill and she resigned from the board. So on this occasion, I want to thank Jane on behalf of the whole board for her years of service and for her leadership, and we are sending her our best wishes for a speedy recovery. And at this point, I would like my colleagues to introduce themselves, starting on my right side here.
I'm Eddie McBarnes, and I'm a public member.
I'm Jean Anderson, tenant.
Ken Finger, landlord rep.
Chuck Lesnick, Deputy Counsel for HCR and Counsel to the Westchester Rent Guidelines Board.
Peter Stecker, Senior Attorney for DHCR and Counsel to the Board.
And I'd like to recognize our court reporter, Michelle Morales. Thank you for your service. At this point, I would like to ask Chuck Lesnick if he has any announcements.
No, we announced yesterday that there are 2 public reps who have yet to be appointed by the Commissioner, and that's still the case. They were approved by the County Board of Legislators on May 21st. One of them has been interviewed, the other one has not yet been interviewed, and if they are interviewed and approved before the rent cycle is over, they will certainly have privy to the testimony, and they'll be able to participate in the vote.
Before I proceed with the testimonies, I would like to remind everybody of a few rules that most of you know already. But we have 3 minutes limit for individuals and 5 minutes for persons representing any organization. Also, if you have any handouts that you want to give the board, please give them to Chuck and he will give it to us. And what else? Oh, when you are at the podium and you finish your presentation or your testimony, please stay there in case any of us has a question for you or any comments. And finally, please, when you introduce yourself, tell us who you represent or where you are, where you live. And let the record show that the Reverend Emma Lofton Woods is present in the meeting.
So now we actually do have a quorum, and Reverend Emma, we have a seat for you right here.
Thank you.
So there was some discussion yesterday about the schedule for the upcoming meetings. And we talked about this meeting here is in White Plains. The next meeting is going to be here also in White Plains, but not in this room. It'll be over at the HCR office at 75 South Broadway. That's the meeting where Guy and his staff comes and presents the compilations of the landlord surveys and other data that is used. It's again open to the public, although the public doesn't speak at that meeting. Then we have the meeting on the 13th, which is going to be
New Rochelle.
in New Rochelle. Where is it going to be, Peter?
New Rochelle City Hall, Council Chambers, 515 North Avenue, New Rochelle.
And then we have the meeting on the 18th, which is going to be in Mount Vernon. And originally, as noticed, that meeting was going to be for the presentation of the positions of the tenant and owner members of the board and discussion therein. And we were going to have a subsequent meeting to that on the 28th of June. We had reserved space here again in White Plains for the purpose of setting the rent guidelines for a 1-year period. There was some discussion yesterday about combining those two meetings and just making one meeting on the 18th, and people wanted to think about it overnight, so the board has now thought about it and ready to entertain a motion, I suspect.
Yeah, you're going to pass a motion to change to, or you want to?
I'll move that we have one meeting for the presentation so that the new member can physically be present for our discussions and not take a chance where Skype may not work and she won't have the opportunity to participate, since I understand she'll be in Australia.
I second the motion.
Thank you.
You can have a
So
vote.
everybody in agreement?
Aye.
Yes?
Aye.
So pass.
So we will send out a second notice to
Just
duly...
leave it right.
To duly noted. So if you were planning on doing something on the 28th, now you can do it.
All right, so we're ready to hear the presentations. And at this point, I would like to call Matt Fornasis to come to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Persanis. I'm an attorney. I'm representing the BRI. My position with the BRI is I handle their labor relations. And as such, I conduct the bargaining of their collective bargaining agreement. And how many buildings? There are 126 buildings covering 16,482 units in Westchester County that are part of the collective bargaining agreement that I negotiate with Local 32 people. That is the preeminent collective bargaining agreement in Westchester County and covers a majority of the buildings. Labor costs. How much have labor costs risen this year? This year, the health cost has risen 8%, which compared to the national average is quite good, but it's still 8%. Our contract expires in October, September 30th, will be the last day. We are going to negotiate a new one, and we project that health costs will rise again somewhere between 8 and 10%. The pension is still under the Pension Protection Act and is labeled a red, which means it's under a plan that must be approved by the federal government in order to recover. That plan calls for a 7% increase that happened this year, and it will call for another 7% increase next year. It's mandated by law. Wages, last year, wages increased by 1.9%, and the overall cost of employees rose 3.8%. As I said, on October 1, we hope to have a new collective bargaining agreement if things go well. And the projected increase is going to be somewhere between 3.5% and 4% per year for labor costs. Labor costs in a typical building are roughly 20 to 25% of total costs. Thank you. I have these figures, if you'd like to hand them out.
Any questions from the board members? Thank you.
Thank you.
And representing the tenants, Dean Capote. Did I pronounce that correctly? Where is he? Dean Capote. He stepped out. Carl Danzler.
I have a copy of the speech. And are you sticking to the 3 minutes for sure? Because I have to cut stuff out if you, because I'm not going to be able to do that.
We don't have too many people today, so we're going to be a little flexible.
I'd like to say it all. It's hard. You only have one chance a year to do this. My name is Carol Danziger. I live in Mamaroneck, New York. I work for a nonprofit that provides technical assistance to small business owners. We help provide our clients with the resources necessary to assist them in not only sustaining but growing their business. Having their businesses prosper and increasing their revenues is essential to supporting their families and strengthening their communities. The landlords here are small business owners, no different than the clients I work with or the local businesses in your community. We all provide products and services to the public. Every year, there is an argument for no increases, mostly because of the alleged profits that landlords make using projected rents derived from vacancy increases and forecasts from HCR reports that don't reflect the real and actual rent amounts paid. And every year, I fail to see the relevance in that argument altogether. Business owners are supposed to make a profit. It's the American dream realized. But it's become clear over the last few years that in this forum, making a profit appears to be frowned upon. Every year it's argued that rent shouldn't be increased because landlords are already making a profit and that we should pay for the increases in our expenses from those profits. Now I can tell you if I told a client not to increase their product costs to cover inflation, I would be acting irresponsibly. A business owner needs to have the right to increase their costs to cover increases in overhead. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index, the dollar experienced an average inflation rate of 2% per year for 2016 and 17, and the inflation rate for 2017 was 2%. Now, sometimes larger properties can better absorb the offensively low rents ETPA buildings are forced to offer, whereas the smaller properties like the one my family owns struggle. Rents are so low that it becomes increasingly difficult to properly maintain the buildings. The profits of every business are different, just like the rent roll is different. What isn't different is inflation, increases in insurance, taxes, and utilities. These go up every year no matter what size building you own. These are the relevant factors, the ones that appear to be ignored year in and year out. The yearly guideline percentage increases should be based on the increases in expenses. We should have the right to increase our rents to cover those increasing costs. Would anyone here let someone else determine what they should get paid to do their job or tell them what profits their business should be allowed to make? I think not. How did it become the responsibility of the tenants, tenant groups, or the board to decide what amount of profit any business should be allowed to make? But judging increases based on the assumption that landlords are already making enough profit is what is being done. I speak for the small business owners, ones with less than 35 units, the owners that struggle. We're not so different than the tenants in our building, and some of us are the tenants in our building. Just like most of my tenants, my husband and I both work full-time. We have for our entire adult life. In addition to my job, I babysit my granddaughter 3 days a week so my daughter can work. I also handle the paperwork and general operations of the building because we can't afford to pay someone to do it. My brother handles the general maintenance on the building because we can't afford to pay someone to do it. And for the past 3 years, he has done it while battling cancer. Affordable housing in Westchester is difficult and no one denies that. There are some people that can barely afford to pay their rents, and we don't argue that. But we don't even know how many of those people live in ETPA buildings because HCR doesn't bother to conduct any means testing. You are passing judgment here on behalf of a demographic you can't even confirm actually live in our buildings in numbers greater than the few dozen that speak here every year. Putting the burden of housing people on this narrow group of taxpayers is not fair and not a solution. We ask that you do what is right and provide an increase that at a minimum covers inflation. In fact, the price index of operating costs of the New York City Rent Guideline Board, also known as the PIOC, shows an overall 4.5% increase in operating costs in our region for owners and managers. This illustrates the need for a fair and realistic guideline from this board, and we also ask that you give an additional increase for smaller buildings, those with 35 units or less, so they can at least have a chance at survival. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
Yeah, I just want to say on behalf of HCR that it isn't that HCR doesn't bother to conduct means testing, it's that the legislation doesn't require or even allow us to do any means testing. The only means testing that's done is for SCREE and DRE, and we gladly do that. And for tenants who make under a certain dollar amount, whether it's $50,000 in Yonkers or $40,000 or $29,000 in some of the other communities, and are paying more than a third of their rent, they don't have to pay the increase.
I know.
Neither does the landlord because the municipality makes that up. So that's the only means testing that we're allowed to do. So it's not that we don't want to do it.
But I think as a whole, HCR should push for that because I think it should be required.
So
I mean,
But your battle there is not with this
Yeah.
board, but it's with the New York State Legislature, because they're the ones every 3 years that renew rent regulations, and they're the ones who determine whether we should do means testing or not.
But I mean, regardless, there's inflation, so, but, point taken.
A question.
Yeah.
So if means testing were in place, then you would be renting your apartment based on the income of the...
No, I feel that if we're making the argument that everyone in my building cannot afford to pay their rent, therefore the rent should be kept low, I think that if we can't prove that these people are low income and need that, then why can't we at least cover our expenses? Why can't, I'm not saying to raise the rents to market rate, I'm just saying that, you know, not everyone in these buildings can afford to pay their rent, and to hold back on an increase that would help us cover our expenses because they might be there isn't right.
Do you run a credit check on the...
I'm sorry.
Do you run a credit check on anyone?
I asked them to provide a copy of their credit report. We don't have any way, we do now. So we asked to see it, you know, just to make sure that there's no judgments and things like that. But
That would just be for new people, though, right?
that's for new people, no, we would never ask existing tenants for any information. Yeah.
Anybody else? Thank you. Is Lynn Capori back? No? He left? Okay. Jim DeResta?
No, we
No?
have a group asked, a relay of three.
Okay.
Okay, that's already been asked.
All right, yeah. Rob Saint? Rob Saint. Sides. Not here? No?
So let the relay begin.
Okay. So I'm going to call Tamara Steele.
Good evening, board members, advocates, and my fellow citizens. My name is Tamara Stewart, and I'm a tenant representative at Westchester Plaza in Mount Vernon. At last night's hearing in Yonkers, I heard several landlords complain about tenants who pay less than market rate rents and how unfair that is to landlords. When questioned about the tenure of these low rent tenants, landlords grudgingly acknowledged that they are individuals and families that have lived in their apartments for a long time. Decades, in some cases. In past years, these long-standing tenants have been called out by name and their rent amounts bad-mouthed like stolen goods. This negative portrayal of long-standing tenants is rude and dehumanizing. Most of the tenants being vilified are grandparents, husbands, wives, sisters, brothers, sons, and daughters. Quite a few of them are senior citizens, like Ms. Morgan, who has Parkinson's and uses a walker, but who always has kind words for her neighbors. Or Mr. and Mrs. Brooke, who are 92 and 89 respectively, and who have been married for over 50 years. Or Mr. Cherry, who is on dialysis and is in failing health, yet he still smiles and considers every day a blessing. These venerable human beings have contributed tens of thousands of dollars to their landlord's bottom line over the years. They deserve to be spoken about and treated with respect, especially by those whom they have enriched. While SCREE is available to some fixed-income senior citizens, not all communities have adopted SCREE. Some communities have SCREE, but the income guideline they've adopted is so low that significant numbers of seniors are ineligible. Many of these elders are struggling to pay their less than market rate rents. It is important for this board to take these responsible taxpayers' plight into account in making your decision, because clearly some landlords do not. Once again, please take a stand for fair and affordable rents and pass 0% increases for the coming year. Thank you in advance for your thoughtful consideration. Westchester tenants are counting on you to do the right thing. Thank you.
I would just like Ms. Stewart to set the record straight. The only person that I saw yesterday that referred to tenants talked about is Mr. V. No names were mentioned that I know, and a Mr. B also, by any landlord rep. The only names that have been mentioned were by yourself tonight, who specifically mentioned 3 people, Morgan, Brooke, and Sherry. So I think I just wanted to make sure the record is clear on that point, that you're the only one who mentioned tenants' names.
In past years, Mr. Mayor,
No, I'm talking-
tenants have been called out by name and their rents have been mentioned.
Ms. Stewart, you said at last night's hearing in Yonkers, you referred to that about tenants' names. We're talking about last night.
I
There wasn't a
said
single-
in past years, these long-standing tenants have been called out by name and their rent amounts, bad mouths like stolen goods. That is true for past years. Thank you.
Anybody else have a comment or question for Ms. Stewart?
I do. The individuals that are mentioned in your statement, are these people that you are familiar with?
Absolutely.
That live in your complex?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And in and around that I have met, in and around my
Let
apartment.
me finish my question.
Yes, ma'am.
Are they aware that you have used their names?
Yes, I got their permission.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, Ms. Stewart. We have a request here from 3 persons who want to make a one presentation. So I'm going to call their names now. Silvio Solario, Jazz Sani, and Jean DeResta. Actually, I have here that it's one presentation, but I'm being told that it's 3 separate presentations.
3 separate parts.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Silvio Solari. I'm a former landlord in Rochelle, New York. This statement will be delivered by 3 BRI AOAC members who are in agreement with its content to comply with the 3-minute speaker stipulation. The statement's presentation style uses the academic approach of defending the position using facts from established reputable publications rather than relying on personal or internet options or blogs. It will focus on 3 points. A, the concern and disappointment felt by most small landlords, defined as those with 48 units or less, over the recent rent increases that have been granted, the mechanism used to determine rent increases and how their situation continues to be ignored. B, the current and potential failures resulting from the current rent guidelines approach for determining increases, and C, recommendation for an alternative, unbiased, analytical approach for determining rent increases. Part A. Rather than utilizing what we call an analytically reasoned rent increase based upon the economic metrics specified in the New York State ETBA Act of 1974, rent guidelines boards have been relying on compassion-driven accommodations without regard for the adverse financial effects such decisions have on small landlords, nor do they identify which tenants truly need an accommodation. Rent guideline boards also completely disregard the routine practice small landlords use to accommodate tenants in financial need via the mechanism of preferential rents. Testimony presented by landlords, especially the small landlords, provide unambiguous statements that the rent increase allowed by rent guidelines boards have been inefficient to enable most small landlords to maintain their properties at optimal conditions and make profit commensurate with their legitimate businesses in the United States. These small landlords make their annual rent guidelines board presentations based upon their individual profit and loss statements from the previous year, which are submitted to the DHCR and are verifiable. Tenant testimony, which is never questioned, claims that any rent increase is unjustified. The rebuttal most often articulated to the Rent Guidelines Board is that no one wants to pay rent increase for any product or service. However, we all realize that for any business to continue to operate, revenue must be sufficient to allow a business to pay its expenses and compensate employee efforts and owner's risk. So tenants' requests for no rent increase are without merit and disingenuous. Anticipating reasonable rent increase was once a key part of the small landlord's budget preparations for the next fiscal year. Profitability is the engine that keeps any business vigorous and self-sustaining and must be encouraged. The framers of the rent stabilization laws understood that rent increases recommendations should be made using an unbiased, analytical approach that considers the industry's economic metrics that are specified within the New York State Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974, Section 4, which has also stipulated the creation of a Rent Guidelines Board to implement and oversee their mandate. Clearly, such an approach is not being used to the detriment of both landlords and tenants. This is an addition. I'm a former landlord. There's a reason why I'm a former landlord, because I couldn't make it. My tenants call me to this day. I was a good shepherd, and today they have a wolverine. And if you don't know what a wolverine is, look it up in the dictionary. And you hear about it in the New York Times constantly, about the wolverine landlords who are coming. And they're coming to Westchester. They're in the city now, as you know, in Manhattan, but they're coming to Westchester. Keep the good landlords by giving fair increases. Thank you.
That's right.
Anybody has a question?
It's okay, I got my answer, thank you. I didn't know if you had sold to a wolverine.
They're wolverines. And it's a bad creature. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jess Sani. I am the landlord's rep and member of BRI, and I'm going to be talking about Part B of the presentation, which was prepared by Jean Fitrista. I want to tell you my background. I'm an attorney by profession. From 2001 to 2014, I was an attorney at Legal Services, New York City, in Westchester office, Brooklyn, one of the poorest neighborhood. And there I used to represent tenants. Thereafter, in 2014, I moved to Westchester, and I worked for legal services for the legal services for the Hudson Valley. And again, I represented tenants. I also represented homeowners who were facing foreclosure in Supreme Court. So I have, in Westchester, I have represented tenants in White Plains, Civil Court, and Yonkers, and in Mount Vernon. So, in all my, okay, so I'm going to go to this was my background. So I'm familiar with what happened, so I'm going to read representation, and which is what I agree with.
Yeah, just leave it in the comments. Give it to me, Mr. Thank you. Sorry.
The part B. The practice of New York RGBC in not granting business appropriate rent increase has led to serious financial problems in New York City for not only small landlords but also for New York City Housing Authority that manages many low-income rental units. A different aspect of these problems have been presented in several comprehensive New York Times articles. For instance, in May of 2015, article entitled Mayor de Blasio's Public Housing Plan to Seek City Aid and More Money from Tenant discusses the reality that lack of funding and tenants not paying their fair share has led to current poor conditions within many of the buildings under the Housing Authority's purview. These buildings' conditions continue to deteriorate is evidenced by the heated arguments between Albany and New York City over how to finance the required maintenance. One recommended proposal is to privatize the management and enable a large number of units to become market rate to increase the total revenue. Further, as described in New York Times May 3rd, 2018 article, 83 million eviction records, a sweeping and intimate new look at housing in America. The situation around the US seems to be getting worse, with many tenants not paying their rent and being evicted in ever-increasing numbers. In the New York Times May 3rd article, 2017 article, Don't Make Housing for the Poor Too Cozy, Carson warns. The US Secretary of Housing, Ben Carson, after touring many US cities' housing arrangements, has gone on record saying too much government assistance has led to too much dependence, and compassion means not giving people a comfortable setting that would make somebody want to say, I will just stay here, they will take care of me. Finally, in Crane, New York, Business April 13, 2018 editorial, a system of perverse incentive for landlord and tenant alike, summarizes the conundrum that the current system for regulating and determining rent increases is adversely affecting both landlords and tenants, and is not having the desired effect of ensuring adequate number of affordable housing units, as stated above. Reducing the number of low-income housing units to market rate units within New York City housing accommodation is being proposed. State is being proposed as a mechanism to increase badly needed rental income. When one examines the historical rent increases granted by RGB, it is obvious that one-side compassion-driven accommodation governs RGB's decision rather than the analytical, reasoned approach mandated by New York ETPA. Finally, tenants have come to consider the compassion approach as an entitlement and the law's mandate as an anthemia. The compassion decision-making approach is flawed and contributes to circus-like hearing that annually occurs at rent guidelines meeting. If the existing laws was followed as intended, both landlords and tenants could enjoy a less contentious relationship. Another important consideration is that, unlike the large companies in New York City that manage rental properties and were portrayed in May 20th, 2018 New York Times 3-article series as almost demonic, most if not all small landlords want to be compassionate and know their tenants. Many landlords live in the same building they rent to their tenants. For example, 2 apartments within the building currently owned by one of the AOAC small landlord was home to both his brother and sister, until they individually married and moved out into private houses. Another very germane observation is that unlike the housing ownership in New York City, there are no two large fund owners in Westchester County. Other than Samson Management, the only other large owner is the owner of a high-rise housing development in Mount Vernon owned by Urban American Properties. The negative tenant testimony frequently presented in the Westchester RGB frequently seems to reside in those complexes.
Can you abbreviate it and summarize?
Maybe
Maybe read the last paragraph?
Sure.
Thank you.
In 2017, using DHCR data, one of our AOAC member and small landlord presented a statistical comparison of Westchester landlord business rate of growth versus other businesses in the US. That analysis shows that the Westchester landlord business growth was much lower. Such analysis used by potential buyer will reduce the potential valuation of a building and buyer's enthusiasm for any building. While obvious, yet it is needed to be restated. Small landlords rely on their building's actual cost revenue to provide for their living expenses and ensure their real estate investment will continue to generate revenue suitable to cover ever-increasing costs. Where net revenue drops below the level required to provide for the landlord's family's living expenses and maintain their building, landlord must reduce the building's maintenance expenses. The current DHCR data confirms lower maintenance expenses for year 2017 fiscal year. Now, tenants are using this lack of maintenance as a reason to justify not paying rent or to deny rent increase. They don't appreciate or care about the physical constraint faced by small landlords. Further, small landlords do not earn their living on the sale valuation of their properties, which is another argument used to downplay the landlord's request for an economically driven rent increase. Thank you.
And we have the hard copy, so we're going to read the rest.
Yes, you need to.
Any questions from the board?
Just a point. So the court stenographer will put the entire text in the minutes as if it was read, not just the synthesized text.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is very long.
It's very short for what it should be. My name is Gene DiResca. I speak to you as a professor of engineering at NYU who has devoted quite a bit of time to evaluate mathematically. As a professor of engineering, this is something that I do. As a professor of engineering, we don't make much money, so I also have to rely on the small property that's been in my family for about 40 years. This is a very intense document, even in its abridged form. I will try to highlight some of the key points. The thesis that I'm proposing is that the current system of rent guidelines is a circus because of the weight of compassion versus analytically reasoned strategies. I am proposing a strategy whereby we use the metrics as specified in the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974, Section 4, incorporate that into a comprehensive mathematical model, which will then be used with the DHCR survey data to absolutely compute a fair estimate for a rent guideline. One of the key tenets of that dictum is that the small landlord be treated as a business, just like any other U.S. business, where the metric of success for any other U.S. business is incorporated within the mathematical model. Now, as far as this year is concerned, and let's fast forward to 6. So how do we compute a quantitatively reasoned increase for this year? Meaning 218, 219. So, using the data which we still have not received, using statistical models which perform regressions on trends of that data, convoluted with one of the 4 listed metrics for profitability. These include the gross domestic product, return on investment, the New York, New Jersey Consumer Price Index, the computed annual growth rate, or a weighted average of these metrics. And then with simple algebraic manipulation, you will obtain a guideline. The model will also incorporate some novelty, and that is that a sliding scale could be incorporated within the model, whereby low-income tenants who are proven by providing verifiable income will have a different increase. Likewise, a sliding scale will also be provided for the building owners, so that those who make less money will be entitled to a higher percentage of that range. So this is novel. The other and final component of this proposal is that, and please don't be offended, I'm a mathematician, but as I say in this italicized, a future variation of the 4-step proposal, which I have very, very briefly enumerated, will eliminate entirely the need for a rent guidelines report. Because data can be saved from each individual landlord, manipulated through this algorithm which I'm proposing. And then, as a result of the annual survey, each landlord will receive an analysis and a recommendation for a rent range that they will be allowed to increase their rents to. I'm open for questions.
Anybody?
I don't have a question, but a comment. Would this not be appropriate for you to present this to one, the county legislator, who then would present it to the respective elected assembly person or the senator, that it goes up the chain to the governor? Because from my understanding, when the board was designed by the Division of then Housing and Community Renewal, I would think that that was done to make certain that the guidelines were based on one testimony from the owner and from the tenant. If your plan were to be implemented, it would not be by this board. It would be by higher level. Just a suggestion.
Indeed. I have been working with my colleagues, I'm a professor at NYU, so I've been working with my colleagues in the engineering and financial engineering and at the Stern School of Business and the law school. So I have started the process of making this first an academic document subject to peer review, but more importantly, the basic hypothesis that I'm putting forth and which you're hearing from parts A and B is that all of the rent guideline reports do not abide by the mandate in that ETPA Act. You make your decisions without using an analytically reasoned strategy. Yes, it's very difficult to do that. And unless you're a statistician or a mathematician or you engage the services of someone with that skill, you are then forced to, or elect to, use a compassion-driven approach, which has historically been very detrimental to the small landlords. I did a calculation using my numbers. In order to just go back to what our income was in 2014, I would require a 9.6% increase because our profits have been declining. Revenue has been declining. I would need 9.6%. Now, I am not making any recommendations. I want that to be very clear. I'm a mathematician. I think with numbers. I think with complex, abstract concepts. And that is an unbiased approach to solving this dilemma, this circus. When you look at what's happening in New York City, it's an obscenity. It's an absolute obscenity. Yes, Stephen.
Can I ask a question? Sure. I think the Reverend's comment is well taken in the sense that some of the things you've suggested obviously need a statutory modification to the ETPA.
Yes.
But having said that, is there any way you can use your analysis as set forth in number 2, I guess, on page 6 and 7?
Yes. That would work.
Given the present law, that's part A, and part B, would you use 1, 2, 3, 4, or a combination of the 4 to come out with a guideline and see how could it work?
I could do that. For me, it's simple. I have already created the algorithms with my computers.
Well, would you use all 4 of those items?
Yes, it's not a difficult thing to do. I could, and I would go so far as to welcome a tenant rep to work with me. Someone who's analytical, someone who's not afraid of mathematics.
Are you indicating that we're not analytical?
I am not accusing anybody of anything. I'm saying I have yet, in all the years I've been here, received a increase which has been validated in terms of how you arrived at that number. So yes, I feel comfortable in saying that I have not seen an analytically reasoned recommendation. This is not an attack. It's an observation. It may come across as an attack because I'm on the landlord side of the table, but at some point in time, banks, all businesses are moving in the direction of heavy reliance on mathematical modeling.
Could you give us a draft of your model that you said you've done?
Yeah. Sure, not a problem. I can give you the spreadsheets, how, using Excel. For me, it's not.
Are you aware that we do not have a staff like New York City?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. But I know that you're all very intelligent people.
No, okay, maybe you can present it before the next meeting, and I'll share it with my comrades here.
I can use my data as an example, if you wish.
Well, I'd like to understand how what weight you give to each thing, how you put them together, and how it would come out. I know it's a little difficult now because we don't have the survey results yet. And we won't have those actually until the night before, I presume the night before the next meeting. But I'd like to see, using your model, maybe using last year's survey results, just to see how it works.
Sure. I can do that. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
anybody else at this point wants to come to the podium, please do so. No? In that case, before we adjourn, excuse me?
No, question. In the email that we received from
No, actually, in the email we received from Guy, we were just questioning whether the survey results were in there, and they weren't.
No,
No, they won't be for a couple of days.
right.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Excuse us.
I would like to make a few announcements. The next meeting of this board will be on Tuesday, June 12th at the Westchester office. And this is where the data analysts bring all the, talking about numbers. We do get numbers. And we get all the comparisons that are made on this day. This is a meeting for the board, but the public is invited, although they can't participate, just be witness. And then we have the next public meeting will be in New Rochelle City Hall on Wednesday, June 13. By that time, we hope to have the new representative of the public who is going to be sworn in, correct?
Right, there have
Yes.
been two proposed.
Yes. And then the next and final meeting will be on Monday, June 18th at 7 o'clock in Mount Vernon City Hall. And if you need to see the schedule, you can go to the website nyshcr.org and you can find the whole schedule there. With that said, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Second. All in favor?
All right.
Thank you. Thank you for having come here.
You get to go
tonight.
and vote.
All right.